Okay, here we go. How do we measure American public opinion? In the 2010 census, there were about 300 million Americans. After the 2020 census, we'll probably find out there's 330 million or so Americans out there. Well, how do we know what they think? How do we know what America or Americans think about a particular topic or issue? Well, over the last 70 years or so, the public opinion poll industry has succeeded in getting ever more accurate in predicting what Americans' opinions are on various topics through the use of public opinion polls. So public opinion polls have become very common in our culture. You hear about them all the time on almost every topic you can think of, especially during election years. For example, this is all through 2020. You hear polls like this: Biden has a stable lead in the national polls. Biden is beating Trump 50% to 42%, according to a Real Clear Politics poll as of August 25th. Or even if it's not about an election or just some sort of issue that's out there. A majority of Americans say gun laws should be more strict, and the number has been rising since 2017 through 2018 and 2019. More and more Americans think that we should have stricter gun control laws. Well, this video is about how do we know those things that I just threw at you and made them sound like facts. They're reported in the media as if they're all facts. But how do we know, and how should we understand these things called public opinion polls? That's what this entire video is about. It might be helpful while listening to the video to have this handout that I provided you. Not necessary, but it might be helpful as a place to take notes on the first page, and then as a thing to refer to at certain points on the back. So, what is a public opinion poll? It is a measure of people's opinions and beliefs using sophisticated/scientific survey techniques. Notice that there's an asterisk after the word scientific that refers you to the third bullet below on the notes page that you're taking. I use the word survey as part of the definition, but if you and sometimes polls are called surveys, or the word survey is used to refer to polls, but oftentimes the word survey is best used to describe a research on opinions that is not done scientifically. Like if I stand on a street corner and just ask 10 random people, hey, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? And half of them say chocolate and half of them say vanilla. And then I just say, oh, okay, half of America prefers chocolate and half of America prefers vanilla. Well, that was a survey, but it wasn't very scientific. And it doesn't deserve to be called a public opinion poll. A public opinion poll refers to these opinion research devices that are done in a sophisticated and scientific way according to the rules that I'm about to give you. So like I said, the public opinion polling industry has been working on the science of this for at least 80 years or so. And there are examples going back of their attempts to get things right all the way back into the 1930s. So there's a couple of early examples of failure that are kind of interesting to think about and talk about. 1936, it was a presidential election year. President Roosevelt was running for re-election for his second term. He was running against Alf Landon. And a magazine called the Literary Digest surveyed, notice I said the word surveyed because they didn't do it very scientifically, and we'll find out what was wrong very soon, surveyed their readers of that magazine, who they were going to vote for, who they thought would win the election. And the results of that survey said that Landon was going to just crush Roosevelt. And of course that turned out to be very wrong. So what was wrong with their survey? You can probably figure it out just by the name of the magazine and the timing. So in 1936, they were still in the middle of the Great Depression. In a depression, unemployment is a huge problem. If you don't have a job, you don't have money. You definitely don't have money to spend on a magazine called Literary Digest. So who subscribes to Literary Digest? Rich people. So if you only ask the readers of that magazine who's going to win, then you're pretty much only asking rich people. And apparently they didn't like Roosevelt very much. So the results of that survey was that Landon would win. Well, the survey was what we would call skewed. They asked the wrong pool of people, or an incorrect pool of people, and they got the incorrect results. 12 years later, the polling industry is more mature and they're better at their methods, but they can still make mistakes. So in 1948, a poll was conducted, I believe, the month of September. Now, we all know that elections are actually held in November. But the poll conducted in September said that Dewey was going to beat Truman. Now, that didn't happen. So what went wrong? Well, they did it too early. They conducted a poll in September and never updated it. They never conducted another poll. So what Truman did from September to October and into November, he campaigned like crazy, and he was able to change people's minds, but that was never discovered. That was never recorded by any further public opinion polls until Election Day, and they found out that, well, Truman actually won. On the handout I gave you, there's a reproduction of this very famous photograph, probably the most famous photograph in American political history. That is not a misprint. That's the Chicago Tribune publishing an edition of their newspaper really, really late the night of the election day. And the election was so close that year that everybody kind of went to bed thinking, especially because the public opinion poll had said Dewey was going to win, everybody went to bed thinking Dewey had won. And the next morning, it turns out that when they actually counted the votes, Truman actually won, and somebody gave Truman a copy of the newspaper, and here he is holding it up and smiling very broadly because the headline is wrong. So what have we learned over the last 80 years? What makes modern scientific polling as accurate as we kind of sort of think it is? Well, first of all, there's the sample size. The sample size is the number of people to whom you ask your questions. That's the number of people you talk to. Earlier in this video, I said that the American population is somewhere in the neighborhood of well over 300 million people. Now I am telling you that to conduct a semi-valid, semi-believable, scientific public opinion poll, you only have to talk to about 1,000 or 1,500 or so people, and you might get something close to being accurate. The second aspect of your public opinion poll that has to be true is the randomness. The participants, the people you ask to answer the questions, have to be discovered or found randomly. You can't set up a website and say, hey, go to the website and give me your opinion. If people go to any trouble to be in the poll, that throws the results off. People have to be found randomly, and the way that's done now is mostly by computers randomly dialing phone numbers. The sample size, that 1,000 or so people you talk to, not only have to be found randomly, but they have to represent the universe. Well, what's the universe? Usually, it's the entire American public. Well, it depends on the question, actually. So, if you want to know what America's favorite flavor of ice cream, then pretty much anybody can eat ice cream. So, you're talking about a universe of 300 million people. If you're talking about election, well, then you're only talking about the voting population, the voting age population. So that's like a couple 100 million people. It depends on what the question is, what your goal is. That's the universe. But usually it's, millions and millions of people. Well, your sample has to be representative of the universe. It means it has to look demographically like the universe. America is very diverse in terms of age, race, gender, religion, blah, 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 income, education. So the sample of people you talk to has to be just as diverse as the universe or the general population at large. That was the mistake that the Literary Digest made. They only talked to rich people. And they got wrong results. Well, the better way to do it, The more accurate way to do it is to make sure that you talk to a mix of income groups, a mix of ages, a mix of religions, in ways that are approximately close to where those groups are represented in the actual population of America. If your sample is representative, if it looks like just as diverse as the rest of the American population, as the rest of the universe, then it's sometimes called a stratified or a quota sample. D, the margin of error. So if your sample size in A is big enough, and if you've correctly conducted the survey, the poll, I mean, you found your participants randomly, and you found a good cross-section, a good diverse demographic group of people. If you do all that right, then you'll have a low margin of error. There is always going to be a margin of error, because the only way to have a 100% correct public opinion poll is to literally talk to everybody in America. Obviously, no one has time and money to do that, so you have to talk to a smaller group. That's your sample size. And if A and B and C are all true, and if you do it all right, then your answers will be pretty accurate to within plus or minus 3.5%. The plus or minus refers to, let's say you ask people their favorite flavor of ice cream or whatever, and whatever number you get back, 38% say strawberry. Well, 38% might be off. It probably is off, but if you do everything right, it's only going to be off by about 3.5% either way. So the true answer could be 41.5% or 34.5%. That's the way the margin of error works. So whatever answer they think they found could be wrong in either direction, up or down. That's what the margin of error or sampling error tells you. And then finally, E, you have to word the question properly. And in the next slide, we'll look at some examples of what's meant by that. So these are just some examples of why it's so important to word the question that you're asking people properly. So these are all historical examples. I could give you the actual statistics if I had them in front of me. For example, back in the 70s, a poll was conducted about the Vietnam War, and it was conducted two different ways. Different groups of people were asked different questions. One group was asked this question: do you favor a policy that would bring home all U.S. troops from Vietnam by the end of the year? A different group of people was asked, do you agree or disagree with a proposal to withdraw all U.S. troops from Vietnam by the end of the year, regardless of what happens there after the troops leave? Now, give yourself a second to think about why would the answers to these two questions, even though they're basically the same question, why would the answers to these two questions be so different? The answer is the second question has an extra clause at the end that reminds you that something bad will happen or could happen if we take our troops out of Vietnam. So the first question only says, hey, you want to bring the troops home? And, you're more likely to immediately say, yeah, sure, that's a good idea. B reminds you that they're fighting there for a reason, and if you bring them home too soon, something bad might happen. So A got way more yes responses than B. Similar kind of situation in the next set of questions. A group of people was asked this question: do you favor or oppose homosexuals serving in the military? A different group of people was asked more or less the same question, but with different words: do you favor or oppose gay men and lesbians serving in the military? The first version of that question got more oppose than the second version of that question, because the word homosexual has a negative connotation. For some reason, and at least not in my mind, but for some reason in some people's minds, the second way of putting it, gay men and lesbians, was more acceptable. It just kind of felt easier. It just felt better, sounded better. So that version of the question, when that poll was conducted, got more in favor responses. Similar thing going on in the next set of questions. Should the government forbid speeches against democracy, or should the government not allow speeches against democracy? Almost identical question. However, in A, the first version of that question, it has the word forbid. And nobody likes the word forbid, especially when it's in a sentence with speech and democracy. So that question, that version of the question, got more no answers than the second version of the question that was asked to a different set of people. Not allow, no one likes that either, but it's softer. It's just not as, it doesn't grab you like the word forbid. Nobody likes forbid. The last set of questions on this slide: would you vote for a candidate who supports the death penalty? Would you vote for a candidate who supports legalizing murder through the death penalty? So I think that's a little more obvious. The B version of the question reminds you that I know death penalty tells you someone's dying, but murder reminds you that a human being is killing a human being. Even if you're in favor of that kind of punishment, the way the B version of the question is worded steers some people away from the concept because it says legalizing murder. So here's some more examples of why it's important to word your question properly. Do you support our current policies? Well, that assumes that the person you're asking the question to has any idea what the current policies are. And people don't like to seem stupid, so they will probably pretend they know something about the current policies, and they'll give you some sort of answer that doesn't really mean anything. How much money do you make in a year? That's a personal question. People are going to lie. There you go. So your results will not be accurate. Why didn't you decide not to vote in the last city election? Well, it's a double negative. It's confusing. Again, if people don't understand the question, they just sort of make up an answer, and your results won't be accurate. Should the city auditors use accrual accounting methods? Well, that has technical jargon in it. It's specific to the accounting profession. Most people don't know what that is. They don't want to give away that they don't know what it is, so they'll answer your question, but they won't know what they're talking about, so your results will be incorrect. Do you support this bill that would let industry pollute our water? Well, that has kind of a trigger word in it, a value-laden word, and that word is pollute, and nobody likes the word pollute. So that's going to encourage people to say no. What these examples in this slide and the previous slide are supposed to get across to you is that there's, in addition to kind of following the rules of the science of public opinion polls, there's also an art to it in how you craft the questions. How you word the question has a lot to do with the answers you get. So that's an important part of, or important aspect to remember about public opinion polls. So how are public opinion polls used, or how are and things that are like public opinion polls? Businesses use them all the time to find out what do customers want? What are consumer preferences concerning packaging? What kind of products to actually make? Where to sell them? Blah, blah, blah. Businesses do this all the time. Nothing you buy in a store has not already been tested in front of dozens and hundreds of test consumers, because they don't want to take a chance of putting a product in a store that no one's going to buy. So they conduct public opinion polls, or at least they conduct investigations that are kind of like public opinion polls that use a lot of the same techniques. Government statistics, you hear about the crime rate and the unemployment rate and inflation rate. Well, no one has the time or money to go around and gather evidence of, information about every crime committed in America, or no one has the time to go around the entire country and find out every single person who's unemployed. The inflation rate is a measure of how quickly prices of products are going up. No one has the time or money to go into every store and track the price of everything that is sold everywhere in America. So these are examples of statistics that are derived using some of the same techniques as public opinion pollsters. Now, since this is a government class, this is the slide you got to really focus on. Because politicians love polls. They can barely make a decision without consulting the latest public opinion poll on this or that issue. First of all, if you're running for office, you need to know, how much do I have to spend on advertising? Well, you can conduct public opinion polls to measure how familiar people already are or aren't with you. They can measure your name recognition. And if you find out, no one's heard of me, well, then you're going to have to spend more on advertising. Politicians use public opinion polls to identify key campaign issues. So, you might be running for office and think, well, this is the most important issue, and I think I should go around talking about this. Well, that might not be true, because what the people want to hear about might be different from what you think the people want to hear about. So you should hire somebody to conduct public opinion polls to find out the people in my district or the people in my state, what are they really worried about right now? What are the key campaign issues I should be talking about? Because you don't want to make that mistake. Gauging / proving public support. So let's say you're giving speeches, whether you're running for office or you already have one and you're in office. If you say stuff like, well, I think America cares about this. Well, when you say stuff like that, it better be you better be able to back it up with what the public opinion polls are saying. Or if you've made a decision that we should do this, well, you might want to check and see what the public opinion polls say to make sure that the people actually kind of agree with you on that. The public opinion polls are a way to measure public support for what you're saying. Fine-tuning policy stands. So fine-tuning makes minor changes to what you're saying about what the government should do or shouldn't do. So you would, again, hire someone to do public opinion polls to find out exactly what does the public want me to do on this issue or that issue or that issue. So those are the political uses of public opinion polls. The media, part D here, the media loves public opinion polls. They treat it like it's news. They assume everybody wants to know the results of the latest public opinion polls. And every news outlet in the country and every news outlet in the world wants to be the one that predicts the next election right. So that's why public opinion polls are conducted so often, especially during election years. So before you start thinking that public opinion polls are always accurate and always right, they are frequently wrong because they're not perfect. And here's some reasons why, or some things you should kind of keep in mind. In addition to always making sure, whenever you hear something is talked about in the news, or the latest public opinion poll says that so and so is going to beat so and so, always look for the margin of error, because that'll tell you, did they talk to enough people? Was their sample size big enough? They're not going to tell you usually the exact characteristics of all the people or how they reach them. Well, sometimes they will, randomly phone calls and stuff like that. But often just the reputation of the polling organization. And as you go through life, you'll hear certain ones over and over again. All the news outlets you can probably trust, ABC News, NBC News, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post. They conduct polls all the time, and they know how to do them, and they do them right. Gallup only does public opinion polls. The Pew Research organization only does public opinion polls. There's a lot of them out there that and sometimes universities get involved. So you'll get a feel as you go through life which ones are reputable and which ones are not. And if they're a reputable organization, that means they probably did it right. They did it randomly. They found their sample participants randomly. They did it stratified samples, meaning that the demographically the samples were just as diverse as the universe they were predicting. Anyway, so assuming you always look for that kind of stuff, here are a few other things to think about. People don't like we said earlier, people don't like to admit that they don't know something. So they will answer questions whether they know anything about it or not, which I think we would all agree reduces the accuracy of your poll. Usually, poll questions are constructed so as to just kind of give some sort of open-ended possibility. They typically are not worded to remind you that something bad is going to happen. So, hey, would you like the government to do this? And the question is going to be, the answer is usually going to be, yeah, sure. unless the question reminds you, oh, that costs $1 billion. So people are usually asked in a way that only asks them to focus on the positive benefits of something, and they're not very often asked to be reminded of the costs. Polls generally fail to measure how strongly opinions are held. What that means is you might get somebody's opinion, but unless you know how much they actually care, you might make the wrong decision by acting on that position, on their answers. You might find out that 57% of Americans are okay with something. That doesn't mean you should go out and do it, because if they don't really care, then maybe the issue should be put to the side and something else be focused on. Lately, because of cell phones, public opinion poll organizations are having a lot of trouble getting in touch with people. The response rate, because they conduct these polls by randomly dialing phone numbers, but more and more people just don't answer the phone. If they don't recognize the number, they don't answer the phone. In the old days, when the only phone you had was in your house, and you thought it was pretty cool to have a phone in your house, you answered the phone. And then it was easier to get people to participate in these sorts of things. Now you just ignore your phone if you don't recognize the number, and public opinion polling organizations are having trouble getting in touch with people, and that might be affecting the accuracy of their polls. There's this sort of effect that people are studying. What if we're having an election, and the public opinion polls keep saying so-and-so's winning, so-and-so's winning, and so-and-so's losing? Well, what does that do psychologically to the people who out there are trying to decide whether or not they should vote? If you're told that so-and-so is going to win the election, and you take that as too much as true, you might not bother to vote, because you think the person you're going to vote for is going to win anyway. And the same way for the losing. So as a country, we kind of have to come to grips with this. I don't know how we're going to do it, but the fact that we're told constantly somebody's winning, somebody's beating somebody, that might be affecting voter turnout. That means it might be convincing some people they don't have to go vote, or their vote's wasted because they, whoever they want to win is or isn't, they think they are or aren't going to win, so they decide not to vote. There's a philosophical question for you. Do you really want your leaders making decisions based on the popularity of a decision, or on the merits of the issue? Modern politicians just cannot live without public opinion polls. They can't make a decision without finding, well, what do the people think about this? And I don't know, if you ask me, we're making it's harder and harder to find actual leaders. Look in the history books before public opinion polls became a thing, and you found people like Washington and Lincoln and Roosevelt who could make the right decisions, and they weren't constantly consulting the latest public opinion poll about what do the people want, because sometimes what the people want is wrong. And a leader, look at that word lead, based on the word lead, takes the people in a direction that turns out to be right, whether the people thought so at the time or not. So I'm not really sure that having our so-called leaders these days always being wrapped up in the latest results of the public opinion polls is such a great thing. And then there's the timing. You know how it is. Stuff on the internet never dies. Information that might be 6 months old, or a year old, or 5 years old, or 20 years old just sort of keeps kind of coming around. And for example, if you're doing research on gun control or something, it matters a lot when the poll was taken. It's because events happen, people's opinions change. So if you're ever looking up, if you're researching an issue for some reason, make sure that if you find public opinion poll information, that the timing backs up what you're trying to report on, because if the public is polled about an issue like gun control, and it's been a while in between shooting incidents, maybe in the news, that means, public opinion might not, concern about the issue might go down, and you might get different results than a public opinion poll taken right after a school shooting or something. So the timing of the poll you're looking at, especially in a historical sense, is something that you have to really keep an eye on. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video, and see you back in class.